You know what's worse than finding out your wife is sleeping with your boss? Finding out that everyone at the university knew about it before you did. But here's the real kicker. They had no idea what I was capable of. Sure, I teach philosophy and ethics, preaching about morality to fresh-faced college kids. But when I discovered those messages on her phone, something snapped. Let's just say, by the time I was done, the entire Boston academic scene would never be the same. And my dear wife, she learned the hard way that karma has a PhD in payback. Life has a funny way of pulling the rug out from under you when you least expect it. Trust me, I know. My name is Marcus Reynolds, and at 45, I thought I had it all figured out. A tenured position as a philosophy professor at one of Boston's most prestigious universities, a beautiful wife, and what I believed was a rock-solid marriage of 12 years. Boy, was I wrong. You see, I've spent my entire career teaching young minds about ethics, morality, and the human condition. The irony isn't lost on me. While I was lecturing about Kant's categorical imperative, my wife Sarah was busy breaking every moral code in the book. Sarah and I met when she started working as a fitness trainer at the university's athletic center. She was different then, genuine, down to earth, with a spark in her eyes that wasn't yet tainted by ambition. But success can change people, and boy, did it change her. When she landed a position at Elite Fitness, Boston's most exclusive gym, I was thrilled for her. What I didn't realize was that I was watching the beginning of the end. It was a Tuesday morning when my world turned upside down. I was in my office, grading papers on existentialism, when my phone buzzed. Sarah had sent me a message, or so I thought. Can't wait for tonight. Same place, same time. You drive me wild. The thing is, that message wasn't meant for me. My hand started shaking as I scrolled through her messages. There he was, Dean Richard Morrison, my boss, the man I saw every day at faculty meetings. The same man who'd smile at me in the hallways while sleeping with my wife behind my back. The messages went back months. Hotel meetings, secret rendezvous, intimate details that made my stomach turn. But what hit me hardest wasn't the physical betrayal. It was the emotional intimacy they shared. The inside jokes, the pet names, the future plans. While I was building our life together, Sarah was planning an escape route. I sat there in my office, surrounded by books of the world's greatest thinkers, yet none of their wisdom could help me make sense of this. Plato, Aristotle, Nietzsche, they all had theories about human nature, but none of them could tell me why my wife chose to destroy everything we had built. I could have confronted her right then, could have called Morrison into my office and exposed their little affair. But something stopped me. Maybe it was my philosophical training kicking in, teaching me to observe, analyze, and plan before acting. Or maybe it was just good old-fashioned rage demanding more satisfying revenge. Then I remembered something, or rather, someone. Helen Morrison, Richard's wife, the elegant owner of the Morrison Gallery in downtown Boston. I'd met her at university functions, always poised, always watching. I wondered if she knew, if she had the same sick feeling in her gut that I did. That's when it hit me. If I was going to handle this, I needed an ally. Someone who had as much to lose as I did. Someone who could help me make them feel the same pain they'd inflicted on us. And who better than the woman who was being played for a fool, just like me? As I sat in my office, watching the sun cast shadows through the window, I began to formulate a plan. Sarah and Richard thought they were so clever, so discreet. But they were about to learn a harsh lesson about karma. And I, the philosophy professor they both underestimated, was going to be their teacher. Finding Helen Morrison wasn't difficult. Her gallery was a landmark in downtown Boston's art scene. What was difficult was trying to figure out how to tell someone their life was as much of a lie as mine. I spent the morning pacing my office, rehearsing different approaches in my head. How do you start that kind of conversation? Hey, guess what? Our spouses are sleeping together. Yeah, real smooth. I finally decided to visit her gallery during the quieter afternoon hours. The Morrison Gallery was exactly what you'd expect. All clean lines and white walls, with paintings worth more than my yearly salary, hanging like silent witnesses. Helen was in her office, reviewing what looked like upcoming exhibition plans. When her assistant announced me, I could see the surprise on her face. We'd met at university functions before, but this was different. I was crossing an unspoken boundary, and we both knew it. Professor Reynolds, she said, rising from her desk. This is unexpected. She was elegant as always, dressed in a tailored blazer that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. What brings you to my gallery? I closed her office door behind me. I think we need to talk, Helen. About Richard. And my wife. The change in her expression was subtle, a slight tightening around the eyes, a barely noticeable tension in her shoulders. She was good at hiding her emotions. I'll give her that. Must come from years of dealing with temperamental artists. I see, she said quietly, gesturing to a chair. And what exactly should we talk about? I pulled out my phone and showed her the messages. All of them. The late-night meetings, the hotel reservations, the intimate conversations. With each swipe of my finger, I could see her perfect composure crumbling just a little more. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long moment, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of her desk. Then she did something that surprised me. She laughed. Not a happy laugh, mind you, but the kind of laugh that comes when the universe's joke is so cruel you can't help but appreciate the irony. Well, she said, standing up to pour herself a drink from a crystal decanter, I guess that explains the late faculty meetings. She offered me a glass, which I accepted. We both needed it. How long have you suspected? I asked. Suspected? Oh, I've known something was going on. Richard hasn't been subtle lately. New clothes, working out more, coming home late smelling like that awful gym. She took a sip of her drink. I just didn't know it was your wife. Though I should have guessed. She's exactly his type. We sat there in her office, two people whose lives had just intersected in the most painful way possible. But as I watched Helen compose herself, straightening her shoulders and lifting her chin, I saw something else, strength, and maybe a hint of anger that matched my own. So, Marcus, she said, fixing me with a steady gaze, I assume you didn't come here just to ruin my afternoon. What exactly did you have in mind? I leaned forward in my chair. I think it's time we taught them both a lesson about consequences. Something they won't forget. A slow smile spread across her face. I'm listening. And that's how it began. An alliance born of betrayal, planned in an art gallery surrounded by million-dollar masterpieces. Helen and I spent the next hour plotting our revenge, each of us bringing our own skills to the table. She had social connections and resources I couldn't dream of, while I had inside access to the university and Richard's schedule. By the time I left the gallery, we had the beginnings of a plan. It wasn't just about exposing them anymore. It was about making them feel the same humiliation and pain they'd inflicted on us. They thought they were so clever, playing their little game. But they were about to learn that they weren't the only ones who could play. As I walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't felt since discovering those messages. Hope. Maybe not the good kind, but at least it was something. Helen and I were going to make them regret every secret meeting, every lie, every betrayal. And we were going to do it in style. The Oak Room of the Boston Harbor Hotel was Richard's kind of place, expensive enough to keep out the riffraff, but public enough to maintain appearances. Helen had confirmed they'd be there, having overheard Richard's dinner plans. Helen looked stunning in her black dress as we entered. We spotted them immediately, Sarah and Richard at a corner table, heads close together, laughing over what I assumed were more faculty jokes at my expense. The look on Sarah's face when she saw us was priceless, like someone had thrown ice water over her. Richard nearly choked on his wine. What a lovely surprise, Helen said, her voice dripping with false warmth. Without waiting for an answer, she slid into the booth next to Richard while I took my place beside Sarah. Marcus, Sarah stammered, her face pale. What are you doing here? Having dinner, I replied casually. The Oak Room has excellent wine, doesn't it, Richard? Richard tried to regain his composure. Helen, this isn't what you think, Dash. Oh, it's not you having dinner with my husband's wife. Helen's smile was razor-sharp. Please enlighten me. A waiter approached, but one look at our table's tension sent him away. Several other diners were already watching with interest. This is hardly the place, Richard hissed, looking around nervously. Why not? I asked, my voice rising. Is there a better place to discuss how long you've been sleeping with my wife? The faculty lounge, perhaps. Sarah grabbed my arm. Marcus, please, you're making a scene. Am I? I thought you liked scenes, Sarah. You've certainly been starring in quite a drama behind my back. Helen reached into her purse and pulled out hotel receipts, spreading them across the tablecloth. The Marriott, the Four Seasons, that charming bed and breakfast in Vermont. You've been busy. The next 10 minutes were deliciously uncomfortable. Helen and I took turns reciting details from their text messages, watching them squirm. Other diners weren't even pretending not to listen anymore. The faculty meeting excuse on our anniversary was creative, I said, watching Sarah's face crumple. Though not as creative as the fitness convention story. Finally, Richard had enough. He threw his napkin down. This is beneath me. Sarah, we're leaving. Running away again. Helen's voice carried. You're good at that. They practically ran from the restaurant, leaving half-finished meals and expensive wine. Helen raised her glass in a mock toast as they fled. We stayed to finish their wine, planning our next move while other diners whispered. Let them talk. By the time Helen and I were done, everyone in Boston would know about their affair. As we left the restaurant, I felt lighter somehow. The first blow had been struck, but this was just the beginning. Sarah and Richard had no idea what was coming next. Helen's penthouse overlooking Boston Common was the perfect place to plot revenge. The morning after our restaurant confrontation, we sat in her study, surrounded by evidence of their affair, text messages, credit card statements, hotel receipts. Richard's up for department chair next month, Helen said, pouring us coffee. He's been campaigning for it for years. The board meeting is in 2 weeks. Sarah's opening her own fitness studio. I added, the lease signing is next week. She's been working on this for months. Helen's smile was calculating. Interesting timing. And I assume the dean's office has been particularly supportive of her business venture. Richard's been pulling strings, I confirmed, getting her meetings with investors, writing recommendation letters, which means there's a paper trail. Helen opened her laptop. Every email, every letter, every favor he's done, all linked to his university account. I leaned forward. What are you thinking? The university has strict policies about conflicts of interest. What would the board think if they knew Richard was using his position to benefit his mistress? They'd kill his chances for department chair, I said, understanding dawning. But we need proof. Helen typed something into her computer. Already on it. My gallery does significant donations to the university. I have friends on the board. One call about concerns over Richard's professional conduct. And they'll look into his communications. I finished. But what about Sarah? Those investors Richard connected her with. They're part of Boston's old money circle. Very traditional, very concerned with appearances. What happens when they learn they're backing a homewrecker? The plan started taking shape. We'd time it perfectly, expose Richard's misconduct right before the board meeting, and let Sarah's investors learn about the affair just before the lease signing. There's more, Helen said. Remember that academic conference in New York? The one that coincided with Sarah's fitness convention? Richard submitted receipts for a double room. University funds. Misuse of university resources. I nodded. That'll look great in front of the board. And I have photos, Helen added. The hotel's security chief owes me a favor. Caught them in the lobby at the hotel restaurant. We spent hours organizing our evidence, building a timeline. Each piece carefully selected for maximum impact. Richard's career would be in shambles, and Sarah's dream of her own studio would crumble. What if they try to deny it? I asked. Claim it's all circumstantial. Helen pulled out her phone, played a recording. Richard's voice, clearly arranging a meeting with Sarah. I always record important conversations, she said simply. A habit from dealing with unreliable artists. By afternoon, our strategy was set. We'd start small, anonymous tips to key board members, quiet words with potential investors. Then escalate, formal complaints, evidence packets, public revelations. They'll never see it coming, Helen said, satisfaction in her voice. Richard thinks he's untouchable in academia. Sarah believes her charm will save her. They thought they were so clever, I added, sneaking around, keeping their affair quiet. Well, Helen raised her coffee cup in a toast. Let's show them how wrong they were. The university board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. By 8:30, every board member had received an anonymous email containing Richard's expense reports, hotel receipts, and selective text messages. Helen's connections had worked perfectly. I watched from my office window as Richard strode across the campus quad, confident as ever in his tailored suit. He had no idea what was waiting for him. My phone buzzed. A text from Helen. Package delivered to Sarah's investors. They're not happy. The impact was immediate. By noon, Richard was called into an emergency meeting with the board. Through my faculty connections, I heard every detail. The board's questions were pointed, specific. How did university funds end up paying for hotel rooms with a non-faculty member? Why were recommendation letters for a private business written on university letterhead? Sarah's day wasn't going any better. Her investors called an urgent meeting, suddenly concerned about moral character and community standards. It seems Boston's old money wasn't keen on backing someone involved in a scandal. I received a furious call from Sarah around 2 p.m. "What have you done?" she demanded. "My investors are pulling out." "Karma's interesting, isn't it?" I replied calmly. "Actions have consequences. You're destroying everything I've worked for. Like you destroyed our marriage." Richard's confrontation came later. He cornered me in the faculty parking lot, his face red with rage. "You vindictive bastard," he snarled. "You think this will change anything?" "No," I said, enjoying his discomfort. "But it'll cost you everything, just like your affair cost me." The next day, local academic circles were buzzing. Richard's bid for department chair was under review. Sarah's studio plans were in shambles. Their carefully constructed worlds were crumbling. Helen called that evening, sounding pleased. "Richard's been suspended pending investigation. The board's particularly interested in those hotel receipts." Sarah's lease fell through, I added. Seems her investors had a morality clause. We'd struck the first blow, but this was just the beginning. Phase 1 had worked perfectly. Their professional lives were in chaos. Now it was time for Phase 2, personal destruction. I sat in my study that night, reading their panicked text messages to each other. They were scrambling, desperate, pointing fingers. Exactly where we wanted them. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, new consequences. But for now, I savored their first taste of destruction. The dominoes were falling, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. A week after the board meeting fiasco, Helen suggested we turn the screws a bit tighter. Richard and Sarah were on the ropes, and it was time to deliver another blow. The Harvard Club was our chosen battleground, old money Boston at its finest. Helen had arranged everything, pulling strings only a gallery owner of her status could manage. When Richard and Sarah arrived, thinking they were meeting potential investors who could save their sinking ships, they looked like deer in headlights finding us at the table instead. "Well, if it isn't the dream team," Helen said, sipping her martini. "Rough week." Richard's face was a storm cloud. "This is getting old, Helen." "Oh, I don't know," I chimed in. "I think it's just getting interesting. Heard about your suspension, by the way. Tough break." Sarah looked like she'd been crying. Her designer outfit couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. "Why are you doing this to us?" "To you." Helen's laugh was ice cold. "Honey, you did this to yourselves. We're just making sure you reap what you sow." The waiter appeared with menus. Nobody ordered food. "The board's asking questions about those hotel receipts," I said casually. "Funny how expense reports can come back to bite you in the behind." Richard's knuckles were white around his whiskey glass. "You've made your point." "Have we?" Helen leaned forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, you two still don't get it. You thought you could play us for fools. Now look who's laughing." Sarah broke first, tears spilling. "I've lost everything. My investors, my studio plans. Karma's a real piece of work, isn't it?" I said, watching her cry. "But hey, at least you have each other. That's what all this was for, right?" The silence that followed was deafening. Richard and Sarah wouldn't even look at each other. Oh, trouble in paradise. Helen's smile was predatory. Don't tell me it wasn't worth blowing up 2 marriages for. They left before the appetizers arrived, practically running from the club. Helen and I watched them go, satisfaction sweet as the wine we were drinking. "Think they've learned their lesson?" she asked. "Not yet," I replied. "But they will." The annual University Donors Gala was the crown jewel of Boston's academic social calendar. Old money mingled with scholarly achievements, and reputations were made or broken over champagne and small talk. Helen had been planning this moment for weeks. Richard still hadn't given up hope of saving his career. Despite his suspension, he'd managed to wrangle an invitation, thinking he could smooth things over with the board members in person. Sarah was his plus one, playing the role of supportive colleague rather than mistress. The ballroom at the Four Seasons was packed with Boston's elite, board members, major donors, department heads, and local dignitaries. Helen and I arrived fashionably late, making sure Richard and Sarah had time to dig themselves in deep. "Ready for the show?" Helen whispered, adjusting her diamond necklace. "Born ready," I replied, watching Richard work the room like nothing was wrong. The first hit came during the dean's opening speech. As he talked about academic integrity and moral leadership, the large screens around the ballroom suddenly came to life. There they were, Richard and Sarah, caught on hotel security cameras in various compromising situations. The timestamp matched his academic conference. The room went dead silent. Richard froze mid-conversation, his face ashen. Sarah looked like she might faint. "My goodness," Helen said loudly enough to carry. "Isn't that the Vermont conference you claimed expenses for, Richard?" The dean stopped speaking, staring at the screens in shock. Board members were whispering, pointing, connecting the dots between the video and the expense reports they'd recently reviewed. But we weren't done. The next slide showed email exchanges between Richard and Sarah, discussing how to use university resources for her business. Each message was dated, documented, damning. "Interesting business strategy," I commented to a nearby board member. "Using university funds to set up your mistress in business." Sarah tried to run, but her heel caught in the carpet. She stumbled, causing several donors to step back like she was contagious. Richard didn't even move to help her. He was too busy trying to explain himself to the board chairman. "This is outrageous," he shouted, but his voice cracked. "This is a violation of privacy." "Like violating university policy?" Helen asked sweetly. "Or just violating your marriage vows?" The dean called for security to escort Richard from the premises. Sarah was crying openly, mascara running down her face. "You've ruined me," Richard snarled as he passed us. "No," Helen replied calmly. "You did that yourself. We just provided the evidence." The aftermath was spectacular. Richard's suspension became a termination. Sarah's fitness studio dreams were officially dead. No one in Boston would touch her now. Their affair had become a cautionary tale in academic circles. The board chairman personally thanked Helen for bringing this matter to light. Several donors praised my courage in exposing academic corruption. "Mission accomplished," Helen said later, as we shared a nightcap. "Almost," I replied. "They're down, but not quite out." She smiled, that predatory smile I'd come to appreciate. "Don't worry. Phase 3 starts tomorrow." The next morning, every major newspaper in Boston had the story. "Academic scandal rocks elite university," screamed the headlines. Richard and Sarah's faces were everywhere, their private shame now public property. Sometimes revenge is best served with a side of public humiliation. The aftermath of the donors' gala hit like a tidal wave. Every newspaper in Boston carried the story, complete with grainy security camera stills and excerpts from the damning emails. But Helen and I weren't done, not by a long shot. "Time to twist the knife," Helen said over breakfast at her penthouse. She pulled out a thick folder. "Remember those financial records we held back?" The documents showed a pattern of misappropriated funds going back years. Richard hadn't just used university money for his affair with Sarah. He'd been cooking the books on research grants, padding expense reports, and funneling money into private accounts. "Anonymous tip to the State Board of Education?" I suggested. Helen's smile was arctic. "Already done. And the IRS." The investigation was swift and merciless. By noon, Richard was being escorted from his office by campus police, box of belongings in hand. His university email was already disconnected, his parking pass revoked. Sarah's world was imploding just as spectacularly. Her gym clients were canceling in droves. The banking group that had tentatively agreed to finance her studio publicly withdrew their offer. Even her apartment complex was reviewing her lease, something about moral character clauses. I watched from my office window as Richard trudged across the quad for the last time. Students whispered and pointed. A few took pictures. Tomorrow they'd be case studies in his ethics class. Irony at its finest. "The board's releasing a statement," Helen texted. "Full audit of all his research grants. State investigators involved." Richard's academic reputation was in tatters. No university would touch him now. His research papers were being reviewed for potential fraud. Decades of work, destroyed by his own greed and arrogance. Sarah tried calling me that evening. "Marcus, please," she begged. "Make it stop. I've lost everything." "Funny how that works," I replied. "Actions have consequences. It was a mistake. I never meant to get caught, to destroy our marriage, to help Richard embezzle university funds. Which part was the mistake, Sarah?" She was crying now. "What am I supposed to do?" Not my problem anymore. The next week brought more revelations. The state investigation uncovered a web of financial misconduct. Richard's previous university was now auditing his old records. The academic community that had once celebrated him now treated his name like poison. Sarah's professional life was equally dead. No gym would hire her. Her reputation was too toxic. Her dreams of owning a studio were ashes. She was spotted working the front desk at a budget motel off the highway. Helen and I met for dinner to celebrate. The maitre d' at L'Espalier gave us the best table. Apparently, he'd heard the whole story and approved of our revenge. To justice, Helen toasted, raising her wine glass. To consequences, I replied. We watched the snow fall over Boston through the restaurant's windows. Somewhere out there, Richard and Sarah were living with the ruins of their choices. Their affair had cost them everything: careers, reputations, futures. Any regrets? Helen asked. I thought about Sarah's tears, Richard's humiliation. Not one. The morning paper arrived as we finished dessert. Richard and Sarah were yesterday's news now, their scandal replaced by fresher disasters. But in academic circles, their names would live on as cautionary tales. Sometimes the best revenge is watching karma do its work. A month after Richard's academic downfall, Sarah showed up at my door. She looked different. The designer workout clothes replaced by department store basics. Her perfectly styled hair now dull and lifeless. Can we talk? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I considered shutting the door in her face, but some small part of me wanted to hear what she had to say. 5 minutes. She stood in my living room, twisting her hands together. The same room where we'd once planned our future. Now it felt like another lifetime. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she started. But I need you to understand. I got lost somewhere along the way. The success, the attention, it went to my head. Save the excuses. I cut in. You didn't get lost. You made choices. Every hotel meeting, every lie, every time you looked me in the eye and said you were working late. Those were choices. Tears started rolling down her face. I've lost everything, Marcus. My business, my reputation. Richard won't even talk to me anymore. Karma's funny like that. Please, she stepped closer. We could try again. I know I made a huge mistake, but I still love you. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Love? You don't know the meaning of the word. Love doesn't sneak around in hotel rooms. Love doesn't betray 12 years of marriage. I'll do anything, she pleaded. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. What I want is for you to leave. The divorce papers are being delivered tomorrow. Sign them. She broke down completely then, sobbing about second chances and redemption. I watched her cry, feeling nothing but a distant pity. You know what's ironic? I said, you and Richard thought you were so clever, hiding your affair. But everyone knew. The gym staff, the faculty wives, they all saw through you. They just waited for me to figure it out. Marcus, please. Goodbye, Sarah. Don't come back. I closed the door on her tears, on our history, on any possibility of reconciliation. Through the window, I watched her walk to her beat-up Honda, a far cry from the luxury SUV she used to drive. Helen called later that night. Richard tried to contact me too, she said. Wanted to explain himself. Let me guess, he's sorry he got caught. Pretty much. I told him to have his lawyer contact mine. We shared a moment of satisfied silence. Our revenge had been complete, thorough, devastating. Just like their betrayal. No regrets, she asked. Not a single one. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Sometimes closure comes not from forgiveness, but from finally closing the door on the past. 2 months after Sarah's last attempt at reconciliation, Helen and I met for coffee at our usual spot near the Common. The autumn air was crisp, and Boston was settling into its pre-winter routine. The divorce is final, I told her, stirring my coffee. Got the papers this morning. Same here, she replied. Richard didn't contest anything. Smart man, finally. We sat in comfortable silence, watching students hurry past with their books and ambitions. The university had recovered from the scandal, though Richard's name was still whispered in cautionary tales during ethics seminars. Heard about Sarah? Helen asked, a slight smile playing on her lips. Moving to Ohio, last I heard. Some small-town gym hired her, and Richard's teaching high school in New Jersey. Quite a fall from department chair dreams. The satisfaction in her voice matched my own feelings. They'd lost everything: careers, reputations, dignity. Sometimes justice works out perfectly. The gallery's doing well, Helen mentioned. Just signed 3 new artists. Turns out, scandal can be good for business. I nodded. My own career had taken an unexpected turn. The philosophy department had promoted me to Richard's former position. Apparently, exposing corruption earned you points in academia. Any regrets about how we handled it? I asked. Helen considered the question, watching steam rise from her cup. Not one. They deserved everything they got. The nuclear option was the right choice then. Absolutely. Sometimes you need to burn it all down to build something better. She was right. From the ashes of our destroyed marriages, both of us had emerged stronger. Helen's gallery was thriving, and my career was soaring. More importantly, we'd found an unexpected friendship in our shared vendetta. You know, Helen said thoughtfully, we make a pretty good team. That we do. The waiter brought our usual pastries. We'd become regulars here during our months of plotting revenge. Now it was just a pleasant spot to enjoy breakfast and victory. To new beginnings, Helen raised her coffee cup. And clean slates, I added. Later, walking through the common, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of betrayal, the burden of revenge, it had all lifted. Sarah and Richard were gone, their betrayal reduced to a painful but distant memory. My phone buzzed, a text from my department secretary. The dean wanted to discuss my upcoming tenure review. Life was moving forward, just as it should. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just destroying the old life. It's building a better new one.